Marriage had always felt like a steady and reliable anchor to me. My wife, Amanda, and I had spent years building a life together that seemed as unshakable as the brick house we worked so hard to call our own. Sure, like any couple, we'd faced our share of ups and downs, but I thought we'd come through enough challenges to deserve a little calm. That comforting belief was shattered one crisp October night. Amanda had always been the outgoing one between us. She thrived on social interactions, whether it was dinners with friends or the occasional girls' night out. I, on the other hand, was content to keep things low-key. I trusted her completely, or at least, I believed I did. So, when she casually mentioned that she was heading out for a big evening with her closest girlfriends, I didn't give it a second thought. "Don't wait up for me, babe," she said with a playful smile. "We're going all out tonight." "Have fun," I replied absent-mindedly, my focus more on the game flickering on the TV screen. "Just don't overdo it with the drinks." The evening unfolded as most of my Friday nights usually did. I did some light tidying around the house, sipped on a couple of beers, and caught up on the week's sports highlights. But as midnight rolled around, an odd uneasiness began to creep in. Amanda hadn't sent me her usual check-in text, the kind she always sent to let me know things were going well. By the time the clock struck 1:30 a.m., I was wide awake, staring at my phone and battling a growing sense of worry. Then, just after 2 a.m., the front door creaked open. I froze in place, standing in the living room as Amanda stumbled inside. She looked a mess. Her heels dangled from one hand, her purse barely clung to her shoulder, and her hair was in complete disarray. Her smeared lipstick and flushed cheeks told a story of too much alcohol. "Hey," she slurred, collapsing onto the couch in an ungraceful heap. "Amanda, are you okay?" I asked, walking closer. She mumbled something incoherent, brushing me off with a dismissive wave of her hand. That's when I noticed it, she wasn't wearing any underwear. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Her short black dress, now rumpled and slightly askew, offered no answers but raised a mountain of questions. My heart pounded in my chest as a nauseating dread settled over me. "Where are your underwear?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. She blinked slowly, her face a picture of confusion. "What?" "Your underwear," I repeated, my tone sharper this time. "You're not wearing any." It seemed to take a moment for her foggy mind to catch up. Then she let out a giggle, a light, nervous laugh that did nothing to ease my anxiety. "Oh, must have lost them," she said with a shrug. "Maybe at the club." Her words felt like a slap to my face. They hung in the air, heavy and damning. "Amanda, are you serious? How do you just lose your underwear?" I asked, my voice now edged with disbelief. She brushed me off again, muttering something about dancing too hard and having too much fun. But I wasn't buying it. Every instinct I had was screaming that something was deeply wrong. As she stumbled off to bed, leaving behind the faint scent of perfume and alcohol, I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands. My thoughts spiraled as I tried to make sense of it all. Had she been with someone else? Was she lying to me? I didn't sleep a wink that night. I stayed rooted on the couch, staring at the ceiling as the fragile trust in our marriage unraveled before my eyes. The next morning, Amanda woke up groggy and cranky, deflecting my questions with curt, irritated answers. But I couldn't let it go. Something had changed inside me, a growing suspicion I couldn't shake. Over breakfast, I tried again. "Amanda, what really happened last night?" She sighed loudly, rubbing her temples like my questions were giving her a headache. "God, not this again. I told you, we were out dancing, and I had too much to drink." "That's it. Then why weren't you wearing your underwear?" Her cheeks flushed, not with embarrassment, but with anger. "Why are you making such a big deal out of this? It's just underwear." But it wasn't just underwear. It was about trust, loyalty, and the promises we'd made to each other. In that moment, it dawned on me that the Amanda I thought I knew might not be the person sitting across from me anymore. I didn't push her further. I didn't push the issue any further. Instead, I let the conversation fizzle out, silently deciding that I'd uncover the truth on my own. That night felt like a pivotal moment, the exact point where I realized my marriage wasn't the steady foundation I thought it was. I had no idea just how far the betrayal reached, but one thing was crystal clear: I wasn't going to let it pass without answers. The suspicion gnawed at me relentlessly. Every time I tried to shove it into the back of my mind, flashes of that night came rushing forward: Amanda's slurred justifications, her missing underwear, and the dismissive way she brushed off my questions. None of it sat right, and no matter how hard I tried to shake it, I knew I couldn't let it go. The following morning, I plastered on a mask of normalcy. Amanda flitted around the house, sipping her coffee and thumbing through her phone like nothing had happened, as if it was just another slow-paced Saturday. Her ease about the whole thing only stoked the fire inside me. I needed answers, something undeniable that could either confirm my fears or finally put them to rest. When Amanda left to run an errand, I jumped at the chance. Her phone seemed like the most obvious place to start. These days, secrets hide in plain sight, tucked away behind lock screens and passwords. Normally, she kept it close, but that morning, she'd left it sitting on the kitchen counter, careless, as if she had nothing to hide. My heart pounded as I picked it up. I knew her passcode. It was my birthday, which felt like a cruel twist of fate now. After unlocking the phone, I dove straight into her messaging apps. Most of the conversations were ordinary, work gossip and harmless chatter with her girlfriends. But then, buried deeper, I stumbled across a thread with a name I didn't recognize. Kyle. My stomach sank as I opened the chat. At first, the messages seemed innocent enough, light, teasing exchanges and inside jokes I couldn't make sense of. But as I scrolled further, the playful tone shifted into something undeniably flirtatious. Then I saw it, the message from the night she'd gone out. Kyle, last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you. Amanda, you're trouble. Kyle, you left something behind, by the way. Might have to come get it. Amanda, keep it safe for me, LOL. The words blurred as the realization hit me like a gut punch. I didn't need to guess what she'd left behind. My hands trembled as I closed the app, carefully placing the phone back exactly where I found it. The betrayal sliced through me, but my thoughts immediately shifted to strategy. Confronting her in the heat of the moment wouldn't solve anything. If anything, it'd hand her the perfect opportunity to spin the truth, gaslight me, or twist the story until I started doubting myself. I wasn't going to give her that chance. She needed to feel the weight of what she'd done, the same crushing weight I was carrying now. I decided I'd start by collecting more evidence. Over the next few days, I played my part perfectly, acting like the oblivious, trusting husband while quietly piecing together the trail she'd left behind. I scanned through her social media, searching for subtle patterns or any slip-ups she hadn't thought to cover. I even dug into our bank statements, and there it was, an unfamiliar charge for a hotel room. The same night as her girls' night out. That was it. The final nail in the coffin. For a brief moment, I considered confronting Kyle directly. But why should I give him the satisfaction of knowing he'd rattled me? He wasn't the root of the issue, Amanda was. She was the one who'd shattered the trust we'd built, the one I had believed in more than anyone else. And the worst part wasn't even the act of cheating itself. It was the complete disregard, the way she'd come home that night, drunk and careless, as if I was too blind to notice or too naive to care. That realization hardened something inside me. That week, I started preparing for what came next. I knew confronting her face to face wouldn't be enough. I wanted her to feel the same whirlwind of confusion and emptiness I was drowning in. I began laying the groundwork quietly and methodically. The first step was financial. I siphoned money from our joint savings, transferring it into a separate account she had no knowledge of. I left just enough behind to avoid raising any suspicion, but I knew the financial cushion would be critical when the time came. Next, I started packing, a little at a time. I took care not to raise any alarms, gradually packing my things and tucking them away in the trunk of my car. A few shirts here, some personal keepsakes there, anything I couldn't bear to lose slowly disappeared from the house, piece by piece. I was careful, methodical. When the time came, I didn't want to leave anything behind that mattered. Securing the paperwork for my departure was the next step. I spent hours researching rentals in a city far enough away to make a clean break. Under the pretense of needing a mental health break, I requested time off from work. By the end of the week, I'd signed a lease for a modest apartment 2 states over. Through it all, Amanda remained blissfully unaware, too caught up in her own life to notice the shift happening right under her nose. Her outings grew more frequent, and she stopped bothering to tell me where she was headed. I didn't press for details. What was the point? Any answer she gave would be a lie, and I was done sifting through them. One evening, as she sat across from me at the dinner table, her eyes glued to the screen of her phone, the silence between us felt heavier than usual. I let it linger for a moment before speaking. "Amanda, do you love me?" I asked, keeping my tone even and measured. Her head jerked up, startled. "What? Of course I do. Why would you even ask that?" "No reason," I replied, forcing a tight-lipped smile. "Just wondering." She shrugged it off, her attention drifting right back to whatever was on her screen. But that brief exchange was enough. I didn't need a drawn-out conversation to get the answer, I already had it. She didn't care, at least not in the way that mattered. And soon enough, she'd understand just how much she had taken for granted. Later that night, as I lay in bed beside her, there was no hesitation, no second-guessing. The decision was final. The countdown had officially started. Leaving someone you've shared a life with isn't easy, even when they've hurt you in ways that can't be repaired. Beyond the logistical hurdles, the emotional weight is suffocating. Amanda had been my everything for years, and even though she'd shattered my trust, I couldn't help but grieve the life we'd built. But every time doubt crept in, I thought about that night, the drunken laugh, the text messages, the way she dismissed my pain like it was nothing. It hardened me. Over the next week, I threw myself into preparation. I knew slipping away unnoticed required more than just packed bags and goodbyes. Amanda was sharp, and if I left any loose ends, she'd find a way to pull on them until everything unraveled. I had to cover every angle. I started by ensuring my finances were secure. Bit by bit, I drained our joint savings, funneling the money into a separate account she had no idea existed. I left just enough behind to avoid suspicion. A little cushion in my own pocket gave me peace of mind. I even withdrew a portion in cash, just in case she froze the accounts once she realized I was gone. I paid off personal debts, canceled memberships linked to our shared address, and switched my mailing address to a P.O. box near the new apartment. After that, I began cutting ties, quietly erasing the breadcrumbs that might lead her to me. I quit my job, citing a personal crisis. My boss was understanding, and I walked away on good terms, knowing I might need a reference someday. Social media was the next to go. It felt extreme, but wiping my online presence clean was necessary. I didn't want Amanda following me, not even digitally. One evening, while she was out, whether with friends or someone else, I no longer cared, I started clearing out the house. I focused on the essentials. Family keepsakes, sentimental pieces, and small things that would hurt too much to leave behind. The furniture and decorations meant nothing to me. They were just objects, easily replaced. I left our wedding album. Taking it with me felt like carrying poison. Those pictures didn't reflect reality, they were just snapshots of a fantasy that had never truly existed. By the time I was done, my car was packed to the brim. The house felt emptier, like a shell of what it once was, physically and emotionally. The hardest part wasn't leaving Amanda. It was walking away from the people who didn't even realize I was disappearing from their lives. My parents lived in another state, so I called them under the pretense of needing to hit the reset button. As always, they supported me without question. I promised to visit soon, though deep down, I knew that reunion wouldn't happen for a while. When it came to mutual friends, I kept things vague. Just need some time for myself, I'd say casually, sidestepping any deeper questions. The fewer people who knew what was really happening, the smoother my plan would unfold. I left Amanda a letter, not out of sentiment, but for the sake of closure. It wasn't long or drenched in emotion, just a few blunt lines laying it all out. I told her I knew about the betrayal, that I couldn't stay married to someone who had built our life on lies. I didn't bother getting into specifics or even addressing her by name. I wanted her to sit with the uncertainty, to feel the weight of those unanswered questions the same way I had for weeks. The final night crept up faster than I expected. Amanda lounged on the couch, scrolling through her phone without much thought for me. She barely said a word the entire evening, too wrapped up in whatever digital drama was keeping her attention. I watched her for a while, memorizing the small details, how her hair slipped over her shoulder, the faint crease in her brow as she scrolled. For a fleeting second, I felt something close to regret. But then Kyle's name resurfaced in my mind. The hotel charge. The texts. No. I couldn't stay. At 4 a.m., I slipped out of bed with the care of a thief, making sure not to stir her. My bags were already packed and loaded into the car, every step of my exit planned down to the last detail. The house was deathly quiet as I moved through it one final time, each room echoing memories that now felt distant and cold. Before leaving, I placed the letter on the kitchen counter, pinning it down with her favorite coffee mug. It felt fitting somehow, her betrayal laid bare with the same indifference she had shown me. Stepping outside, the sharp morning air stung against my face. The horizon was beginning to warm with the first traces of sunlight as I started the car and drove away. I didn't look back. By the time Amanda woke up, I was crossing the state line, miles away from the life I'd left behind. My phone buzzed relentlessly, but I ignored the incoming calls and messages. She had found the letter by now. The frantic texts that followed only confirmed it. Amanda, where are you? What's going on? Amanda, we need to talk. Please come home. Amanda, what do you mean you're leaving? Is this a joke? I could practically feel the desperation behind each message, but there was no emotion left in me to meet it. No rage, no sorrow, just a dull sense of satisfaction. Amanda had made her choices. Now, she'd have to live with them. By midday, I was settling into a small, bare apartment in a city where no one knew me. I'd rented it under a different name, another layer of distance between myself and the life I'd left behind. The space felt unfamiliar and empty, but it also felt like freedom. That night, stretched out on a bare mattress, I wondered what Amanda was doing. Was she crying? Angry? Scrambling to spin the story to her friends? None of it mattered anymore. For the first time in years, her emotions weren't mine to manage. The next morning, Amanda woke to an unsettling quiet. There was no familiar scent of coffee drifting through the house, no sound of me moving around the kitchen. Half asleep, she assumed I had stepped out early, maybe for a run or an early shift at work. But when she rolled over, the empty side of the bed made her pause. She wandered into the kitchen, yawning, but froze the moment her eyes landed on the counter. A single sheet of paper sat beneath her favorite coffee mug. Somehow, the sight of it felt heavier than it should have. Amanda picked up the note, frowning as her eyes scanned over the short, cutting words. Amanda. I know. I can't do this anymore. Don't try to find me. I've made sure you won't be able to. Goodbye. Her stomach twisted as she read it again, as if she had misinterpreted the meaning. I know. Know what? The vagueness clawed at her, forcing her to confront the truths she had shoved into the back of her mind. Panic settled in fast. She hurried through the house, searching for signs of me. The closets were half empty. My shoes, gone from the entryway. She bolted to the bathroom, where the reality fully sank in. My toothbrush, razor, and everything else that had once made up my corner of the counter had disappeared. Even the faint trace of my cologne no longer lingered. The truth hit Amanda like a freight train. I wasn't out for a run or off to work early. I was gone, for good. Her first instinct was to call me, but every attempt went straight to voicemail. She fired off text after text, only to be met with silence. Panic tightened its grip as she logged into our joint accounts, only to find them nearly drained. The financial safety net she had always assumed was there had vanished along with me. Frustration flared into anger. She hurled her phone onto the couch, pacing back and forth across the living room. "What the hell is wrong with him?" she muttered under her breath. But as the hours dragged on, that anger gradually dissolved into something heavier, fear. She started calling her closest friends, her voice trembling as she explained what had happened. "He just left," she stammered. "No warning. No explanation. What if something happened to him?" Her friends tried to comfort her, but doubt hung in their voices. "Amanda, are you sure you don't know why he left?" one of them asked carefully. She hesitated, scrambling for an answer. "Of course not. I mean, we've been fine. Mostly." But even she could hear how unconvincing it sounded. Over the next few days, Amanda's world began to unravel. The whispers started small, just murmurs between friends about how I had walked out, leaving her blindsided. But those whispers grew louder, transforming into outright questions. People were starting to piece things together. They remembered the late nights out. The way Amanda had flirted with strangers a little too openly. The distance that had been growing between us for months. Her closest friend, Megan, wasn't as gentle as the others. "Amanda," Megan asked one afternoon, her gaze sharp and unwavering, "is there something you're not telling us? Because this doesn't add up. He's not the kind of guy who just leaves out of the blue." Amanda's walls crumbled. Tears streamed down her face as she finally confessed. "I was seeing someone else," she sobbed. "It wasn't serious, it didn't mean anything. I never thought he'd find out." Megan's expression hardened. "You didn't think he'd find out," she repeated, her disappointment cutting through Amanda's excuses. "That's not the point, Amanda. You betrayed him. What exactly did you expect to happen?" But Amanda's problems didn't end with friendships. Financially, she was drowning. With our savings nearly gone, she scrambled to keep up with bills she had never bothered to manage. Amanda had always leaned on me to handle the practical side of things, and now, with no backup plan, the weight of responsibility pressed down hard. Desperate, she tried reaching out to Kyle, the man she had risked it all for. But every call went unanswered, and her texts were met with nothing but silence. He had disappeared, ghosting her completely. Whatever thrill she had chased with him evaporated in an instant, leaving her humiliated and alone. Weeks blurred into months, and Amanda's life continued its slow collapse. The guilt gnawed at her, seeping into every part of her day. Work became unbearable. Her performance tanked, and she struggled to hold on to her job. Friends who once orbited closely began to fade into the background, distancing themselves without ever needing to say a word. Even her family, usually a soft place to land, grew cold. When Amanda finally broke down and told her mother the truth, hoping for understanding, she was met with quiet disappointment instead. "You had a good man," her mother said softly, shaking her head. "And you threw it all away. I don't know what to tell you, Amanda." The isolation pressed in from all sides. One night, Amanda sat alone in the dim glow of the living room, the shadows stretching long across the walls. The house felt suffocatingly silent, each creak echoing louder than it should. For the first time, she allowed herself to truly face it all. The lies. The reckless decisions. The countless ways she had justified betraying me. As her mind looped through every misstep, the letter I left seemed to weigh heavier than before. Those short, cold words I had written, the finality of them, hit her with crushing force. She had made her choices. And now, she was left alone with them. Amanda tried to draft an email, spilling out apology after apology, but each word felt empty and forced. In the end, she never hit send. Deep down, she knew there wasn't a string of sentences long enough or heartfelt enough to erase the damage she'd caused. She'd always been the vibrant one, the life of every party, the person everyone wanted to be around. But now, Amanda felt like a hollow version of herself, burdened by regret and the realization that she had lost the one person who had ever truly loved her. Her betrayal wasn't just an idea anymore, it was her day-to-day reality. And for the first time, Amanda understood what it meant to lose everything that mattered. Her pain wasn't sudden. It crept in slowly, lingering in every quiet moment, in the empty spaces where my presence used to be. She lived with it, unable to escape the reminders of what she'd thrown away. Meanwhile, 2 states away, I was in the process of starting over. The small apartment was sparse and uninviting, but I didn't mind. The emptiness mirrored the clean break I so desperately needed. Those first few weeks passed in a haze of chores and checklists, unpacking, setting up utilities, and scrolling through job listings. I didn't miss the life I left behind, but every now and then, Amanda's face crept into my thoughts. Her laughter, her touch, the pieces of her I once cherished. It hurt, but I forced myself to remember the betrayal that made walking away necessary. I buried myself in work, landing a job at a modest marketing firm. It wasn't flashy, but it gave me structure, something to throw myself into when the past tried to claw its way back. The people were friendly, and for the first time in years, I felt lighter. Free from the emotional weight I'd been carrying for so long. Still, curiosity lingered. I couldn't help but check in on Amanda from afar. A few clicks through mutual friends' social media accounts revealed glimpses of her unraveling. She looked thinner, the light in her eyes noticeably dimmed. The carefree snapshots of nights out and vacations had dried up. Selfies were rare, and when she did post, the joy in her smile was gone. One post from a mutual friend caught my eye. "Hard times build strong people," it read, with a picture of Amanda at a small gathering. Her smile looked stiff, her face drawn with exhaustion. I stared at the image for a long moment before closing the app, conflicted. A part of me felt vindicated, she was facing the consequences of her choices, just as I had wanted. But it didn't feel as satisfying as I'd imagined. Time moved on, and I slowly settled into my new life. Casual dating helped me reconnect with the idea of relationships, though I kept things light and fleeting. Each new experience chipped away at the bitterness I had carried with me, and little by little, I felt like myself again. Smiling felt natural. Laughter didn't feel forced. But life, as it often does, had other plans. On a crisp autumn afternoon, I walked into a local cafe, eager for nothing more than a warm cup of coffee in a break from work. And that's when I saw her. Amanda. She sat by the window, staring into a steaming mug, lost in thought. Her hair was shorter, and she looked noticeably thinner than the woman I had once known. I froze in place, heart pounding, as a flood of emotions surged to the surface. She hadn't noticed me yet, and I stood at the threshold of a choice: slip out unnoticed or face the past head-on. I chose the latter. Amanda. Her head snapped up at the sound of my voice. Her eyes widened in disbelief, and for a moment, she just stared at me, as if unsure I was real. "James," she whispered, the word barely making it past her lips. Without waiting for an invitation, I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Up close, I could see the changes time had etched into her face. There was a fragility in her expression, a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I could ask you the same thing," I replied evenly. She swallowed hard, fingers tightening around the mug as if it might anchor her. I didn't know you lived here. I wasn't expecting to see you." The silence that followed felt suffocating, thick with everything left unsaid. "Why did you leave like that?" Amanda's voice broke through, fragile and cracking at the edges. I met her gaze without wavering. "You know why, Amanda. Don't act like you don't." Her eyes filled with tears, and she gave a small, trembling nod as her composure began to unravel. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know it doesn't mean much now, but I am. I messed up, and I've paid for it every day since you left." Her words hung between us, raw, vulnerable. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy for her. Almost. "I trusted you," I said, keeping my tone steady, though the weight of those words pressed down hard. "I gave you everything, and you tossed it aside like it was nothing. You don't get to play the victim now." She flinched but didn't try to defend herself. "You're right," she admitted softly. "I don't deserve forgiveness. But I've changed, James. Losing you, it forced me to see what I had, and what I lost. I know it's too late, but I needed to tell you." I studied her closely, searching for signs of sincerity. She looked shattered, but I couldn't tell if it was from genuine regret or the weight of the fallout she'd brought upon herself. After a long pause, I rose to my feet. "I appreciate the apology, Amanda, but it doesn't change anything. I've moved on. You should too." Her eyes, glossy with unshed tears, locked onto mine. "I'll never forgive myself," she said, voice trembling. "That's yours to live with," I replied firmly. "Not mine." Without another word, I walked out of the cafe, leaving her behind for the second time. The cold autumn air wrapped around me as I stepped outside, but for the first time in a long while, I felt lighter. Closure hadn't come from Amanda's apology, it came from finally letting go. She was a chapter one had finished, and I was ready to keep writing the rest of my story. I thought that was the end of it. I told myself I'd said everything that needed to be said. Amanda's remorse, however real, didn't undo what had happened or the choices she made. I felt nothing. No love. No lingering anger. Just an emptiness where something had once been. But life doesn't always let things end so neatly. A week later, I opened my inbox to find an email from Amanda. My first instinct was to delete it without a second glance, but curiosity lingered. Subject: "I know I can't fix this. James. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, and I'm sorry for reaching out. I just needed you to know that seeing you again gave me something I haven't felt in a long time, hope. Not for us, but for myself. I've been falling apart since you left. I deserved every bit of the pain, but it forced me to see the person I'd become. You were a good man, and I failed you. I'll carry that with me for the rest of my life. Take care of yourself. You deserve the happiness I couldn't give you. Amanda." I read it twice, then a third time. It stirred something in me, but not in the way Amanda might have hoped. There was no longing, no spark of old feelings. Instead, what bubbled up was anger. Not the blinding rage that had consumed me when I first uncovered her betrayal, but something colder. Sharper. Amanda had left me to pick up the pieces of a shattered life, offering nothing but silence as I struggled to rebuild. Now she thought a few lines of remorse would somehow balance the scales. I had moved on. I was rebuilding. But Amanda hadn't faced the full weight of what she'd done. Not really. Over the next few days, an idea began to take shape. This wasn't about revenge. I wasn't interested in petty payback. It was about justice. Amanda had wounded me in ways she could never fully comprehend, and part of me needed her to understand the depth of her betrayal, the scars she couldn't see. I reached out to a mutual friend, someone who had managed to stay neutral throughout the fallout, keeping lines open with both Amanda and me. Through her, I learned Amanda had been hard at work trying to rebuild her reputation. She was patching things up with the friends who had distanced themselves after our split, crafting a narrative of redemption. In her version, she was someone who had made a mistake, someone who had learned from it and grown. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. That's when an idea struck me. I dug up an old email address and reached out to Megan, Amanda's former friend, the one who had confronted her right after I left. Megan had always been straightforward, the kind of person who valued honesty over sugarcoating. Megan. I thought you should know the full truth about why I left Amanda. If you're still close to her, maybe this will shed light on what really happened. Attached to the message were screenshots, texts between Amanda and Kyle, the bank statement with the hotel charge, and a copy of the letter I had left behind. I wasn't sure what I expected. Maybe silence. Maybe indifference. But just a few hours later, Megan replied. James. Thank you for sharing this. I suspected as much, but seeing the proof, it's heartbreaking. Amanda's been trying to spin the story, but she needs to face what she did. I'll make sure people know the truth. The fallout was swift and unforgiving. Word spread quickly through Amanda's circle of friends, tearing apart the carefully woven story she had been telling. Friends who had started to let her back in distanced themselves once again, unwilling to stand by someone who had been so calculated in her deceit. Her family, already strained by the knowledge of her infidelity, grew colder. Her mother, once her fiercest advocate, finally laid it bare. You need to stop blaming James for leaving, she reportedly told Amanda. He had every right to walk away. Even her workplace became a minefield. One day, during a team meeting, a colleague, someone who had caught wind of the gossip, confronted her outright. Is it true? They asked, in front of everyone. Were you the reason your husband left? Amanda left the office in tears that afternoon. It wasn't about revenge. I hadn't set out to destroy her life. This was about accountability, something Amanda had spent years dodging. She had hurt me, but she had hurt herself too, and no amount of apologies or self-pity could mask that anymore. She could no longer run from the damage she had done, not to me, but to her own life. I didn't feel satisfaction seeing her unravel. If anything, I felt a quiet sense of peace. Closure, finally. Amanda had shattered my trust, but I had rebuilt. I was happy. I had faced the pain head-on and come out the other side stronger for it. Amanda, on the other hand, had tried to bury hers under layers of denial. Now, she had no choice but to confront it. Months passed. Life moved forward. Then, one evening, I received a final email from Amanda. Subject: Thank you for making me face it. James. I know you were behind the truth coming out, and as much as it hurt, I needed it. I've spent so long trying to escape my mistakes, but I can't anymore. You were right to leave, and I'll never stop regretting what I did to you. But I'm starting to fix myself. Not for you, not for anyone else. For me. I hope you're happy, truly. You deserve it. Amanda. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. Amanda's journey was no longer tied to mine. Her healing, her regrets, they weren't my concern. For the first time, I felt free. Not just from Amanda, but from the weight of everything we had been. As I closed the email, a small smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. The last chapter of our story had been written. Now, it was time to turn the page and keep moving forward.